The morning after the storm in Tampa, EMT Emily Carter comes home to a cracked back door and strange muddy prints in the yard. Her dad, Frank, slipping deeper into dementia, swears a giant gray dog has been abandoned outside. But the truth is bigger than a mistake. Emily secretly brought home an orphaned baby elephant to keep it alive, hidden from the HOA and animal control. And then the impossible happens. The dog starts following Frank like he's the last family it has left. The morning after the storm felt too clean for what it had done. Sunlight lay soft on the puddles outside Station 14, turning broken palm fronds into quiet shadows. Emily Carter stripped off her gloves, the scent of antiseptic still clinging to her hands, and told herself the hardest part of the night was over. Her uniform was damp at the collar, hair pinned up the way Tampa paramedics learned to do in August heat. She'd run 3 calls since midnight, 1 overdose, 1 fall, 1 elderly man who kept apologizing for bleeding on her stretcher. The city was waking up, pretending it hadn't shaken. She started her truck, letting the AC fight the sticky air, and checked her phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, then 1 from the neighborhood landline. Emily's stomach tightened before she even hit play, like her body knew what her mind didn't want to hear. "Emily, it's Mrs. Donnelly," the voicemail said, breathless and shaky. "Your dad was outside again before sunrise. I tried to bring him back in, but he kept saying he was looking for the dog. Honey, your back door was open. Please call me." The message ended on a tiny, helpless sigh. Frank Carter had been an electrician with steady hands and straight lines, the kind of man who labeled every breaker and never forgot a tool. Now he forgot his pills and sometimes forgot where the bathroom was. The doctor called it early-stage dementia. Emily called it fog. Some mornings it rolled in so fast she couldn't stop it. She drove home with the radio off, listening instead to the thump of her own pulse. Their street looked normal. Trim lawns, white fences, hurricane shutters still half closed. But there was a crookedness to the quiet. A trash can on its side. A wind chime twisted into a knot, like the whole neighborhood had been nudged out of place. Emily found Frank's front porch, light still on, pale in the daylight. The welcome mat was damp, and the door chain hung loose, untouched. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and lemon cleaner. A pill organizer sat on the counter, Tuesday's slot still full. Her father's jacket was draped over a chair as if he'd vanished mid-motion. "Dad," she called, keeping her voice gentle on purpose. From the hallway came the soft shuffle of slippers. Frank appeared with his hair sticking up, eyes watery, expression pinned between confusion and determination. "You're late," he said, like she'd missed dinner by an hour, instead of coming off a night shift. "I'm right here," Emily said, stepping closer, scanning his face for fear, for anger, for that blank panic she'd seen before. Frank's gaze flicked past her, toward the back of the house. "He was out there," he murmured. "Big fella, gray. Somebody left him." He said it like it was obvious, like it was her job to fix. Emily followed the line of his stare to the back door. It was cracked open just enough to let humid air creep in. Mud tracked across the tile. Heavy prints, wider than any dog's paws, but smeared like someone had tried to wipe them away. A low, uneasy chill ran up Emily's spine, cold against all that Florida heat. Her phone buzzed again. This time the screen read, "Gulf Coast Wildlife Rescue." Emily hesitated, thumb hovering. The rescue never called her this early, unless something was wrong. She answered anyway, pressing the phone to her ear while her eyes stayed on those strange marks. "Em," a voice said, tight with stress. "It's Tasha. We lost power in the elephant wing last night. Generators acting up, and the nursery's dropping temperature. We've got a calf, 3 months, weak lungs, immune issues. We can't keep him stable here if the grid keeps flickering." Emily swallowed. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the street, normal life revving up like nothing mattered. Inside, her father stood quietly behind her, hands clasped the way he used to stand in front of a breaker box. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Emily said, already hearing the impossible shape of it. "We're out of options," Tasha admitted. "Partner clinics are full. The county's slammed after the storm. You've got space, and you know the protocols. Just temporarily. 2 weeks at most. We'd bring supplies, we'd do night checks. But we need a safe place today." Emily's mind split into two tracks at once. One saw Frank alone in this house while she ran calls, opening doors he shouldn't, wandering toward danger with a smile. The other saw a baby elephant shivering under failing heat lamps, its whole future hinging on a few degrees. She pressed her palm to the kitchen counter to steady herself. Frank touched her elbow, light as a question. "Who's on the phone?" he asked. Emily looked at him, really looked, and saw the old pride flicker under the fog. The man who'd never let a neighbor's light stay out. The man who couldn't tie his shoes some mornings, but still wanted to help something lost. Emily turned toward the window over the sink. In the backyard, the grass glittered with leftover dew. The garage sat quiet, door closed, shadows pooled underneath it. Nothing moved, and yet the air felt charged, like the moment before thunder. Somewhere out there, her father believed a gray dog had come and gone. She lowered her voice and spoke into the phone, careful, controlled, but not entirely steady. "Tell me what you need," she said. "All of it. Formula, heat lamps, fencing. And no flashing lights, no sirens. The HOA on this street has eyes everywhere." She glanced at Frank again, and something inside her hardened into resolve. When she hung up, the kitchen felt too small for the decision she'd just made. Frank was watching her with the anxious patience of a man waiting for instructions. Emily forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're going to have company," she told him softly. Frank brightened, like the fog had thinned by a fraction. He nodded once, solemn and certain. "Good," he said. Then, almost under his breath, as if he didn't want to scare the idea away, "Bring him home." Emily's day should have ended with a shower and a locked door. Instead, it turned into lists, heat lamps, baby formula, fencing panels, written on the back of an old patient care report. She moved through the house like a careful storm, picking up her father's scattered world without making him feel swept aside. Frank hovered near the kitchen, drawn to her urgency. He rinsed a mug 3 times, then forgot why it was wet. Emily guided his hands gently, slipped his morning pills into applesauce, and watched him swallow, like a man doing his best to cooperate with a fog he couldn't see. Outside, the neighborhood looked freshly scrubbed, but the rules hadn't softened with the weather. The HOA sign at the entrance still stood crisp and smug. No commercial vehicles overnight, no livestock, no exotic animals. Emily read it every time she came home, and today it felt like it was reading her. She texted Officer Jake Miller, "Just a quiet heads up, the way you warn someone you trust." Jake had been the rookie cop who brought her coffee on a wreck scene years ago, and now he patrolled their district with a steady calm Emily respected. "If you hear anything weird," she wrote, "it's me. Nothing dangerous. Just family stuff." The rescue called back, with details, and each word made the impossible more real. The calf's name was Nico, 3 months old, weak lungs after a rough transport seizure. He needed warmth, clean air, and someone who wouldn't panic at 2 a.m. Emily listened with her eyes closed, imagining small ribs rising too fast. By noon, she'd cleared the garage like it was a triage bay. Boxes stacked, tools hung. She laid down thick rubber mats, then straw over that, and a line of soft blankets she didn't care about ruining. She installed 2 heat lamps and tested the backup battery twice, like she was checking a defibrillator. Frank watched from the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, the posture of a man trying to remember his place. "What's all this?" he asked. Emily chose her words the way she chose medications, carefully, with the least side effects. "A little patient," she said. "Needs rest. Needs quiet." A breeze shifted through the yard, and Frank's gaze drifted toward the back fence. His face tightened, then softened, like he'd heard a sound only he could recognize. "The big dog," he murmured. "I knew he was real." Emily's stomach knotted. She'd hoped it was just a dream he'd built in the dark. The rescue director, Tasha, arrived near dusk in a plain pickup, no logo, no flashing hazard lights. In the bed were hay bales wrapped in tarp, metal panels, and sealed tubs of formula, labeled in thick black marker. She shook Emily's hand, like they were making a deal in secret, not saving a life. They worked fast. Fence panels clicked into place. A portable fan hummed in the corner. Emily checked the garage door's locks, then added a second latch higher up, out of Frank's easy reach. Still, she couldn't shake the memory of the back door cracked open that morning, like the house itself had exhaled. Across the street, a curtain moved. Martha Briggs's silhouette cut sharp against her living room lamp. Martha was the kind of neighbor who treated rules like scripture and gossip like a hobby. Emily had seen her at HOA meetings with a clipboard, scanning faces as if she could issue citations by eye. Night fell warm and heavy, and the street turned quiet in that Florida way. Frogs, distant traffic, a dog barking 2 houses down. Emily kept the porch lights low and the blinds angled. Frank dozed in his recliner, waking every few minutes to ask if she'd seen Buddy yet, then drifting off again. At 1:47 a.m., the transport trailer rolled in without drama, guided by headlights dimmed to a respectful glow. Emily met it at the curb, heart thumping like she was about to run a code. The men unloading spoke in whispers. Metal ramps clinked softly. Every sound felt too loud. Nico came down the ramp with a handler's hand on his shoulder and a rope that wasn't pulling, just guiding. He was smaller than Emily expected, still huge in a way that didn't fit her world. Round belly, thin legs, skin like cool stone under moonlight. His eyes caught the porch light and reflected it back, curious and tired. Emily's throat tightened. She'd seen 1,000 kinds of suffering on ambulances, but this was different, quiet, orphaned, innocent. She stepped closer, slow, palms open. Nico's trunk lifted, testing the air, then touched the edge of her sleeve like a question. Emily exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. They led him into the garage, and the heat lamps painted him gold. He let out a soft, breathy sound, half sigh, half baby complaint, and lowered his head into the straw. Emily checked his breathing, counted the rise of his sides, listened for that faint rasp the rescue had warned her about. It was there, but steady. Inside the house, Frank stirred. A floorboard creaked. Emily froze, eyes snapping to the kitchen doorway. She waited for his shadow, for his voice, for the chain of events she couldn't control. But Frank only mumbled in his sleep, something about feeding the dog, then fell, quiet again. By the time the trailer pulled away, the street looked unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Emily stood in her backyard with the damp grass under her boots, listening to Nico settle. The risk was real. HOA, neighbors, the law, yet her chest felt lighter than it had in months. She slipped back inside and checked on her father. Frank's face in sleep looked younger, softer, free of the day's confusion. Emily tucked a blanket up to his shoulders, like he was the child now. Then she whispered into the dim kitchen, more promise than plan. Just make it through the night. The house held its breath until morning. Emily slept in fragments. 10 minutes here, 20 there, waking to the soft ping of her phone alarms and the steady hum of the garage fan on the baby monitor. Each time she checked the screen, Nico was there, a gray bundle under warm light, breathing like a small engine. Outside, the first sun came up gentle, as if it didn't know what kind of trouble it could cause. Emily made coffee and stared at the mug until the steam stopped looking like smoke. In the living room, Frank's recliner creaked. He was already awake, rubbing his hands together like he was warming up for work. He shuffled into the kitchen in wool socks, hair flattened on one side, eyes narrowed against the brightness. Dementia didn't erase habit. It just rearranged it. He reached for the coffee tin, measured grounds with old electrician precision, and then paused, head tilting toward the back of the house. "What's that smell?" he asked. Emily's pulse kicked. The garage carried hay and warm straw, earthy and sweet. She tried for casual. "Supplies," she said, "from the rescue." Frank didn't argue. His attention had already drifted to the window over the sink. In the backyard, early mist still clung to the grass. The garage door was down, but a thin line of light leaked beneath it, and a shape moved behind the frosted side panel, slow, solid, alive. Frank leaned closer to the glass, squinting. His cataracts turned edges into guesses. "There," he whispered, with the certainty of a man finding proof. "That's him. Big gray dog. I told you." Emily opened her mouth to correct him, then stopped. She watched the way his face brightened, how the fog seemed to thin when he had something simple to name. Frank grabbed his old work boots from the corner by the door, the ones Emily had tried to hide because he tripped in them. He shoved his feet in anyway, stubborn muscle memory, winning. He found a faded leash in the junk drawer, cracked leather, metal clip dull with time. Emily's throat tightened at the sight. "That's Daisy's leash," she said softly, thinking of the Labrador they'd lost years ago. Frank blinked, searching. "Good leash," he replied, as if that settled it. He didn't remember Daisy's last day, but his hands remembered caring for something that depended on him. Emily trailed him too. The back door, staying 2 steps behind the way she did, on scenes when she didn't trust what was ahead. Frank pushed the door open, and humid air rushed in. The yard looked ordinary. Fence, potted plants, a wind-tossed hammock, until the garage door rattled faintly from the inside. Nico heard them. Emily saw the shadow shift under the door, then the soft bump of a curious forehead. Frank took it as a greeting. He stepped closer, voice dropping into the gentle tone he'd used with every dog he ever loved. "Hey there, buddy," he said. "You lost?" Emily opened the garage side door just a crack, enough to control the moment. Warm light spilled out, and Nico's face appeared in it. Round forehead, big ears, trunk lifting like a question mark. Frank's mind reached for familiar shapes, and in that reach, it rewrote what he saw. To him, the trunk became a long snout. The ears became floppy dog ears. The wide feet became oversized paws. He smiled, relief washing over him. "See?" he told Emily, proud. "Great big fella. Somebody dumped him." Emily's chest ached with tenderness and fear at the same time. Frank crouched slowly, knees complaining, and held out his hand the way good dog owners do, palm open, no sudden moves. Nico stepped forward with the careful curiosity of a baby. His trunk uncurled and touched Frank's fingers, warm and soft, exploring the calluses like they were a story. Frank's face changed in an instant. The lines around his eyes loosened. His mouth opened into a smile so wide it startled Emily, because she hadn't seen it in months. He let out a laugh, quiet at first, then real. "Aren't you something?" he whispered, voice thick with wonder. Nico leaned in, trunk wrapping gently around Frank's wrist in a clumsy, affectionate grip. Frank didn't flinch. He patted Nico's cheek like it was a dog's head, slow and rhythmic. Nico made a low, pleased rumble that Emily felt more than heard, like a purr too big for the body making it. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, hands pressed to the frame, tears threatening without permission. She'd brought home a rescue animal to save it from a failing nursery. She hadn't expected it to reach into her father's damaged mind and pull out a piece of him that still knew how to love. Frank straightened with effort and clipped the old leash to nothing, really. He laughed at himself, unbothered. "Come on then," he said, as if the rule of the world was simple. "If you find a lost dog, you bring him in." He turned toward the house, and Nico, without hesitation, followed. Not into the kitchen, not past the threshold, just to the edge of the patio, close enough to be home in Frank's eyes. He trailed behind Frank like a shadow, trunk brushing the air near his elbow. Frank looked back, pleased, and Emily felt a strange, dangerous hope rise in her chest. Across the street, a curtain twitched again. Emily saw the movement, and her stomach dropped. Martha Briggs, coffee cup in hand, stood just long enough to notice a gray shape near the garage. Her head tilted, sharp as a hawk's. Then the curtain snapped shut. Emily swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Dad," she said, stepping closer. "We keep him back here, okay?" Frank nodded, without looking away from Nico. "He's my buddy," he said simply. The word landed like a promise, and like a problem. As the morning warmed, Frank sat down on the damp grass, without caring about his pants, one hand resting on Nico's side. Nico stood beside him, steady and content, as if he'd been waiting for this exact kind of quiet. Emily watched them and felt the story turning, whether she was ready or not. Emily didn't correct him. Not when Frank called Nico buddy. Not when he described that big gray dog like it was the best thing that had happened all year. She told herself she'd explain later, slowly, gently, when her father's mind was clearer. But the truth sat heavy in her throat because she could already see what this mistake was giving him. By mid-morning, Frank had claimed a spot beside the garage like it was his new job site. He pulled an upside-down milk crate into the grass and sat with his back straight, watching Buddy eat hay as if it were a bowl of kibble. Every few minutes he'd reach out and pat that broad, warm side, proud of how calm his dog was. Emily kept one eye on them and the other on her phone. The rescue had texted instructions, formula measurements, breathing rates, what to do if the calf coughed. Emily read every line twice, then wrote it again on a yellow notepad in thick marker, the way she made signs for confused patients in the ER. She taped the note to the fridge at Frank's eye level. Buddy's care plan, it read, simple and friendly. She didn't add the word elephant. She didn't add warnings in red. She had learned with dementia that some truths landed like broken glass, and you couldn't sweep them up fast enough. Frank wandered inside around lunchtime, following the smell of food. He opened the pantry, paused, and looked lost for a beat, like he'd forgotten what pantries were for. Emily slid in beside him, handed him a cutting board, and pointed to a bowl of washed vegetables. "Can you help me?" she asked, like it was his idea. His hand steadied. He chopped cucumbers into careful coins, then carrots into uneven chunks, the concentration sharpening his face. He kept glancing through the window, as if worried Buddy might vanish. "Don't let him go," Frank murmured. "People dump dogs like trash." Emily nodded, throat tight, and kept her voice even. "He's not going anywhere." The neighborhood, unfortunately, was not as kind. A notification pinged from the HOA group chat. Subject, unauthorized vehicle, last night. Emily's stomach flipped. Someone had posted a blurry screenshot. A dark trailer shape at the curb at 2 a.m. Headlights. Muted. The caption underneath was short and smug. "Anyone know whose this was?" Emily's eyes snapped to the street. Martha Briggs stood on her porch across the way, arms folded, phone in her hand like a badge. Martha didn't look at Emily's house directly. She didn't have to. The whole block knew Martha watched everything, and the whole block pretended not to notice. Emily stepped outside, forcing her face into neutral. "Morning, Martha," she called, light as she could make it. Martha turned with a smile that didn't warm. "Emily? Long night?" Her gaze slid past Emily toward the garage, like it had its own agenda. "Saw some activity. Hope everything's compliant." Behind Emily, Frank called out, cheerful. "Hey, ma'am, you seen my dog?" The question landed in the air like a dropped plate. Martha's eyebrows lifted, interested now. "Dog?" she repeated slow. Emily's heart hammered. She laughed too quickly. "Dad's been joking," she said. "He thinks every shadow is a dog." Frank didn't like being dismissed. Dementia didn't always make him quiet. It made him stubborn. He stood and pointed toward the garage. "Big one," he insisted. "Gray, gentle. Name's Buddy." Emily felt the ground tilt. Martha's eyes sharpened, and for a second her smile looked like it might crack into something uglier. Emily moved fast, stepping between Martha's line of sight and the thin strip of light under the garage door. "He's been having a rough week," she said softly, letting a hint of vulnerability show. "Storm threw him off. I'm keeping him calm." Martha's gaze flicked to Frank's face, then back to Emily, calculating. She nodded once, pretending sympathy. "Well," Martha said, voice sweet, "the HOA just wants to keep everyone safe, especially after a hurricane. If you need anything, we have protocols." She lifted her phone slightly, as if the word protocols could be weaponized. "And please, remember, no livestock. It's in the bylaws." When Martha finally walked away, Emily's knees felt weak. Frank was still smiling, blissfully unaware of the danger he'd almost invited into their yard. "Nice lady," he said. Then he frowned, the fog curling back in. "Did she take Buddy?" "No," Emily said quickly. "Buddy's right here." She led him toward the garage with gentle urgency. Nico was inside, shifting in the straw, trunk curling up at the familiar sound of Frank's voice. Frank's shoulders relaxed, like someone had turned a dial down. Emily lowered her voice, close to her father's ear. "Listen to me, okay?" she said, careful not to sound like a nurse. "Buddy needs quiet. People get nervous when they don't understand. So we keep him back here. No telling the neighbors. Just you and me." Frank stared at her, processing. For a moment, his eyes cleared. Not fully, but enough. "Secret," he said, nodding slowly. "Like hiding Christmas presents." The comparison made Emily's chest ache. She smiled and squeezed his hand. Exactly like that. Inside the house, Emily added a new lock higher on the back door. She set the baby monitor volume up and the camera angles down. She moved the leash into a drawer and taped a fresh note beside the fridge list. "Buddy stays in the backyard." Her handwriting looked steadier than she felt. That evening, as the light softened, Frank sat by the garage again, humming under his breath. Nico stood close, ears relaxed, trunk reaching out now and then to touch Frank's shoulder like a gentle reminder, "You're not alone." Emily watched from the kitchen, the rise of hope warming her, until her phone buzzed again. A new message in the HOA chat, posted by Martha. "Reminder, reports of unusual animals will be forwarded to animal control." Under it was a single emoji, a magnifying glass. Emily's hands went cold. Outside, Frank laughed at something Buddy did, and Emily realized the lie she'd chosen had just grown teeth. The next morning, Emily woke to a sound she hadn't heard in months, Frank moving with purpose. Not the slow shuffle from bedroom to recliner, but steady footsteps, cabinet doors opening and closing in a rhythm like a man packing a lunchbox for work. The house smelled like coffee and fresh-cut celery. She watched from the hallway for a second, careful not to startle him. Frank stood at the counter with a dish towel over his shoulder, reading her big marker note on the fridge like it was a blueprint. His lips moved as he sounded out the words. Formula, hay, vegetables. He nodded to himself, satisfied. "Buddy eats healthy," he declared. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She slipped his pill organizer closer, opened Tuesday's slot, and set it beside the mug. Frank glanced at it, then, miracle of small miracles, took the pills without arguing. "Can't be sick if I'm guarding him," he said, as if Buddy had promoted him to something important. In the garage, Nico was already awake, shifting in the straw under the warm lamps. He made a soft, rumbling sound when Frank appeared, the way a dog might thump its tail in greeting. Frank's face lit up so fast, it almost hurt to watch. He crouched, patted Nico's cheek, and whispered, "Morning, big guy." Emily prepared the bottle of warm formula while listening to Nico's breathing. The faint rasp was still there, but less sharp than yesterday. She counted the rise of his sides, checked the color of his gums, and told herself to stay clinical. But then Frank started talking, gentle, steady, like he was smoothing wrinkles out of the air. He told Buddy about the job sites he used to run, the way the power would kick back on after a storm, the pride of making something work again. He spoke like he remembered everything, even the parts he usually lost. Nico leaned closer, trunk brushing Frank's forearm, and Frank smiled, as if the touch plugged him into the present. After breakfast, Frank stood up with the cracked old leash again, hopeful. Emily intercepted it before he could clip it onto nothing. "Backyard only," she reminded him, keeping her tone warm. Frank frowned, then accepted it, the way a good dog owner accepts limits for safety. "Fine," he said, "but we can train." That's how it started, Frank's training sessions. He dragged 2 patio chairs into the grass like he was setting up a class. He held a hand out and said, "Sit." Nico blinked, then slowly, bent his front legs and lowered his round little body into the straw pile like he'd seen handlers do. Frank froze, stunned. Emily's laugh escaped before she could stop it. Frank's eyes went wide with pride. "Did you see that?" he shouted, not caring about the neighbors. "He's smarter than half the guys I worked with." Nico made a pleased sound and nudged Frank's shoulder with his trunk. Frank treated it like a kiss. The joy didn't last cleanly. Around noon, Emily's phone rang with dispatch tones she couldn't ignore. An extra shift request. A multi-car pileup on I-275. Not enough medics on rotation after the storm. Emily stared at the screen, then at her father, then at Nico's warm, breathing body. Responsibility tightened like a knot. She called Officer Jake Miller instead. "Can you swing by my street today?" she asked, voice low. "Not official. Just keep an eye out. Martha's getting loud." Jake didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll pass through. You good?" Emily looked at Frank, rubbing Nico's ear, and lied smoothly. "I'm fine." When Emily left for the call, she set up cameras on her tablet, volume high, and taped a second note beside the back door. "Do not open for anyone." She showed Frank the baby monitor screen like it was a TV channel. "If you need me," she said, "push this button. And Buddy stays back here. Promise." Frank lifted his right hand like he was taking an oath. "Promise," he said. Then he added softer, like he didn't want Buddy to hear fear. "I won't let him get taken." Out on the highway, Emily worked the wreck with hands that knew what to do, but her mind kept snapping back to the backyard. Between compressions and oxygen masks, she checked her tablet. Frank sat beside Buddy. Frank stood and walked a small circle, Buddy following like a shadow. Frank laughed, and Emily's chest loosened. Then the screen flickered to a new angle. Across the street, Martha was outside with her phone raised, aiming toward Emily's fence. Emily's blood went cold. Martha wasn't just watching anymore. She was collecting proof. And Frank, bless his damaged mind, had no idea he was living inside a countdown. Emily finished the call and drove home faster than she should have, siren off, heart loud. As she turned onto her street, she saw Jake's patrol car rolling slow at the corner. Casual, unhurried, exactly the kind of presence that told nosy people to mind their own business. Jake stepped out as Emily parked, his expression calm but alert. "Your HOA queen's been circling," he said quietly. She called in unusual animal noises. "I told dispatch it's likely storm debris and stressed pets. But what are you hiding back there, Em?" Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him everything, because Jake was safe, but one wrong word could turn protection into paperwork. "A medical foster," she said carefully. "Temporary, harmless, and it's helping my dad." Jake studied her face, then nodded once. "Okay, keep it quiet." Inside the yard, Frank looked up when Emily came through the gate, his face bright with triumph. "He sat," he announced, like it was the best news in the world. Nico pressed close to Frank's side, calm and steady, and Emily felt the strangest thing, hope building like a tide. That hope cracked when her phone buzzed with a new HOA message. Martha had posted a photo of the garage door from the street, the thin line of light beneath it circled in red. "Unregistered animal kept in outbuilding," she wrote. "Animal control has been notified." Emily's hands tightened around the phone until her knuckles went pale. Behind her, Frank reached down and scratched Buddy's cheek like everything was still simple. "Don't worry," he said, almost cheerful. "I'll keep him safe." Emily stared at the message and realized they weren't just hiding a baby elephant. They were hiding a miracle, and miracles attract attention. That evening, the heat finally broke. A thin, cool breeze slid through the yard and made the palm leaves whisper like they were sharing secrets. Emily left the porch light off and moved around the kitchen by the glow of the stove clock, careful not to paint her windows bright for anyone watching. Frank was already outside, seated on his milk crate like it was a front row seat to something sacred. Nico stood close, calm under the heat lamps, trunk drifting toward Frank's shoulder every time the old man's voice caught. Emily lingered near the back door, listening, pretending she was just checking vitals. Frank talked to Buddy the way lonely people talk to dogs, simple sentences that carried heavier things. He admitted he hated the pill organizer because it made him feel like a child. He confessed that some mornings he woke up and couldn't picture his wife's face, only the sound of her laugh. Nico listened without moving, as if stillness was his way of holding space. Emily watched the rhythm of it and felt her chest tighten. On the ambulance, she was trained to solve problems fast, stop bleeding, restart breathing, stabilize. But this? You couldn't shock a memory back into place. You couldn't suture dignity. All you could do was stand there and hope the heart remembered what the brain forgot. Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something Emily hadn't seen in years. A battered harmonica, dull metal with a scratch down one side. He held it like it might fall apart. "Used to play this on break," he told Buddy, voice shy. "Your mama liked it." The word mama came out tangled, like it hurt. Emily almost stepped forward to stop him, to protect him from whatever sadness the music might open. But then Frank lifted the harmonica to his mouth, took a breath, and let the first notes float out into the dusk. The melody was slow and shaky, but it was there. Amazing grace, imperfect and honest. Nico's reaction wasn't loud. It was stranger than that. He went still, ears lifting, trunk swaying gently like a pendulum in time with the tune. When Frank missed a note and hesitated, Nico leaned in and touched his shoulder as if to say, "Keep going." Frank's eyes filled, but he played on. From the kitchen window, Emily felt tears slide down her face without warning. Her father, who couldn't remember what day it was, still remembered how to make music, and a baby elephant, who'd lost his herd, stood there receiving it like it was a lullaby from home. The yard looked ordinary, but it felt holy. The spell broke with a sharp notification tone. Emily's phone buzzed, screen lighting her hand bright. HOA group, new post. Martha had uploaded a grainy video, filmed from behind her curtains, showing a gray shape near Emily's garage. The caption was clipped. "Unusual animal confirmed. Reporting." Emily's stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. She stepped back into the house, thumb hovering over the comments. Neighbors reacted with question marks, nervous jokes, one person writing, "Probably a pig." Martha replied fast, "Not a pig. I'm contacting animal control tomorrow." Emily forced herself to breathe. "Don't panic," she told herself, the way she told patients. Panic makes mistakes. She turned the phone face down and walked back outside, past Frank's music, past Nico's calm, carrying the weight alone for another minute. Frank finished the song and lowered the harmonica, smiling like he'd done something useful. "He likes it," he said, nodding at Buddy. "See? Good boy." Emily swallowed a laugh that wanted to become a sob. "He does," she managed. "He really does." A car door thumped somewhere down the street. Emily's senses sharpened instantly. Headlights swept across the fence slats, then slid away. She couldn't tell if it was a neighbor coming home or someone slowing down to look. Every normal sound felt suspicious now, every passing engine a threat. Officer Jake's text came in a minute later. "Animal Control got a call flagged for tomorrow. AM source, HOA." Emily stared at the screen until the words blurred. She wanted to call Jake, to beg him to stop it, but she knew the limits. He could stall. He couldn't erase a complaint. She went back to the garage and checked Nico like a paramedic. Checks a patient when the world is spinning. Hands steady, eyes focused. His breathing was smoother than yesterday. His skin was warm. He took formula without fuss. For a moment, Emily hated how life could be cruel and beautiful at the same time. Frank stood in the doorway, watching her with a child's uncertainty. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Emily's throat tightened. Dementia made him misread the world, but it didn't dull his instinct for danger in her voice. Emily forced softness into her face. "No," she said. "You did something right." She guided him back to his recliner and turned on an old western to keep him settled. Then she returned to the kitchen table and spread out a notebook like it was a battle plan. Options, timing, Cover stories. She wrote vet appointment and circled it. She wrote quiet transport and underlined it twice. Near midnight, Frank wandered out again, restless. He stood at the back door, looking toward the garage, like a man looking at a sleeping child. "I don't like them watching him," he murmured, not naming who. Emily stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "Neither do I," she said. Outside, Nico shifted in the straw and let out a soft, lonely sound. Frank's hand pressed to the glass, and for a second the fog cleared enough to show raw fear underneath. "Promise me," he whispered, "they won't take my buddy." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the impossible squeeze of that promise. Then she opened them and spoke like a medic calling time, steady, final, meant to hold. "I promise," she said, "not tomorrow." And as she said it, she knew the clock had already started running. Morning came in sharp and bright, the kind of Florida morning that made everything look innocent. Emily hadn't slept so much as hovered between thoughts, listening to every creak of the house and every soft movement from the garage monitor. When the sun hit the kitchen tile, her jaw already hurt from clenching. She moved quietly, packing like she was prepping for a call-out. Bottles, formula, medical kit, spare blankets. She kept her voice calm when she woke Frank, but her hands betrayed her, shaking just slightly as she buttoned his shirt. "We're doing a checkup today," she told him. "Buddy, too." Frank nodded, trusting her tone more than her words. Outside, the air was damp, carrying the clean smell that comes after a storm when the world tries to reset. Nico was awake and restless, shifting his weight, trunk tapping the gate as if he sensed the tension. He followed Frank along the fence line with a quiet loyalty that made Emily's chest ache, like he was already practicing not being left behind. Frank fed him carefully, slower than usual, like he was stretching time. He brushed Nico's skin with an old towel, murmuring praise with every stroke. "Good boy," he kept saying, "the way you say it when you're trying to convince yourself. Things will stay normal." Emily watched the ritual and felt dread crawling up her spine. At 9:18 a.m., Jake's patrol car rolled past again, slower this time. He didn't stop, but his eyes met Emily's through the windshield, and he gave the tiniest shake of his head. Not good. Emily's phone buzzed a second later. "They're coming," Jake texted. "Animal control plus HOA rep." Emily swallowed hard and forced her feet to keep moving. She could already see Martha across the street, stepping onto her porch like she'd been waiting for a parade. She wore sunglasses and a neat blouse, clipboard tucked under one arm. She looked thrilled in a way only certain people could look when they thought they were about to be right. Emily turned to Frank. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice, making it simple. "Some people don't understand Buddy. They'll get scared. So we keep him back here. No opening the gate. No talking to anyone. Just follow me." Frank frowned, confused by the seriousness, but he nodded. Once. Then fate chose violence in the smallest way. A gust of wind shoved the back door harder than Emily expected, and the latch didn't catch. The door drifted open an inch, then two. Nico saw the gap like it was an invitation. He stepped forward, trunk reaching, feet soft on the patio, following Frank toward the house. "Buddy?" "No," Emily whispered sharply, heart jumping into her throat. Frank turned, delighted. "He wants in," he said, as if that settled everything. He held his hand out, beckoning. Nico took another step, and for a terrifying second, the baby elephant stood right at the threshold, visible to anyone with the right angle. A car door slammed out front. Emily heard voices. Two men, official, polite. "Animal control," someone called. Emily's blood went ice cold. She shoved the back door closed with her hip and planted herself in front of it like a human lock. Behind her, Frank stared, startled by her sudden intensity. The front doorbell rang, then rang again. Emily left Frank by the kitchen table with a glass of water and a hand on his shoulder. "Stay here," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "This is important." She walked to the front, smoothing her face into something neutral, something professional, the way she did when she stepped into strangers' crises. When she opened the door, Martha was already talking, voice bright, with practiced concern. Beside her stood an animal control officer in a khaki uniform, and another man holding a tablet. "We received a report," the officer began. "Possible exotic animal on the property. We need to verify for public safety." Emily kept her smile small. "I'm a paramedic," she said, as if credentials could be armor. "And there's no threat, just storm-related supplies and a family situation." The officer's eyes flicked past her into the house, noticing Frank in the background. Martha leaned slightly, trying to see around Emily's shoulder. Frank, bless him, chose that moment to speak. "It's my dog," he announced from the kitchen, loud and proud. "Best dog I ever had." Martha's head snapped toward him. "Dog?" she echoed, dripping doubt. The animal control officer shifted his stance, suddenly more alert. Emily stepped forward, blocking the view, using her body the way she used it on scenes, between danger and the vulnerable. "My father has dementia," she said, letting the truth land heavy. "He mislabels things sometimes. There is no exotic animal here." The officer's expression softened a fraction, but Martha's didn't. "Then you won't mind a quick look," Martha said sweetly, "for everyone's peace of mind." Emily's heart pounded. If they stepped into the backyard, they'd see the garage setup. They'd see hay. They'd hear Nico. One curious glance would end everything. Behind her, the baby monitor on the counter emitted a faint rustle, straw shifting, a low rumble. The animal control officer's head tilted. "What was that?" he asked. Emily's mind raced. She grabbed the nearest lifeline, the lie that was also almost true. "It's a medical foster," she said, keeping her voice steady. "A rescued animal recovering from the storm. It's under veterinary oversight. It's not dangerous." The officer hesitated. "What kind of animal?" he pressed. Emily met his eyes and chose the safest words she could. "A calf," she said. "A baby. Very sick." Martha's lips tightened. "Calf is livestock," she snapped. "HOA rules," Emily cut in, sharper than she intended. "HOA rules don't treat pneumonia," she said. The silence that followed was thin and electric. The officer looked between them, weighing law against humanity, procedure against reality. Frank stepped closer, confused by the tension, voice wobbling. "Don't take him," he pleaded, and suddenly he wasn't a stubborn old electrician. He was a scared man watching the only bright thing in his fog being threatened. His hands trembled. "He follows me," Frank said, quieter. "He chose me." Emily felt her eyes burn. She softened her voice, turned toward her father, and made a decision that tasted like surrender and love at the same time. "Dad," she said gently, "Buddy needs to see the animal doctor today, just for a checkup. I need you to help me keep him calm. Can you do that?" Frank stared at her as if the words had to travel through thick water to reach him. Then he nodded, slow. "Checkup," he repeated, clinging to the familiar idea of fixing something. He looked past Emily, toward the back of the house, and his face broke into a worried tenderness. "Okay," he whispered, "but I go with him." The animal control officer exhaled, relieved to have a path. "If there's veterinary paperwork," he said, "we can hold off, but we'll need confirmation by end of day." Martha's mouth opened to protest, but Jake's patrol car appeared at the curb like a quiet warning, his presence suddenly very real. Emily nodded quickly. "You'll have it," she promised. She closed the door with hands that didn't feel like her own. In the kitchen, Frank was already moving toward the back, drawn by Buddy like gravity. Nico rustled in the garage, sensing the shift. Emily followed them, heart pounding, knowing she'd bought hours, not safety. And when Frank reached the back door, Nico stepped closer from inside the garage, trunk stretching toward him through the bars, desperate and trusting. He followed Frank home again, right up to the door, like he already knew what goodbye sounded like. The day didn't slow down after the door closed. It tightened. Emily moved through the house with the calm face of a medic and the shaking nerves of a daughter. She sent Tasha a single text, "Now," and got back a reply so fast it felt like fate had been waiting. "On the way. Quiet truck. No markings. Frank stayed near the back door like a guard dog himself, watching the garage with worry in his eyes. "He's scared," he kept saying, voice low, as if Buddy could understand the word. Emily guided him to the couch, put the Western back on, and sat beside him long enough to make him breathe slower. Then she stood and checked the cameras again. Outside, Martha didn't leave. She paced her front yard with her phone raised, talking to someone, pointing at Emily's fence like it was evidence. Every time a car passed, Emily flinched. The neighborhood suddenly felt like a stage, and she could feel the audience leaning in. At 1:42 p.m., Jake texted again. "Animal control's giving you until 3. Martha's pushing hard." Emily's mouth went dry. 2 hours. She'd handled tighter deadlines on accident scenes, but those didn't involve her father's heart. In the garage, Nico shifted and made a soft, lonely sound, and Frank rose immediately. "Buddy," Frank called, stepping toward the door. Emily caught his wrist. "Wait," she said gently. "Let me go first." Frank's brow furrowed, the fog swirling. "Why are they mad?" he asked. "He's just a dog." Emily swallowed and chose the only truth she could afford. "They don't understand him." The rescue truck arrived like a shadow slipping into a driveway. No logos, no flashing lights, just a dull gray van with tinted windows. 2 handlers stepped out with quiet efficiency, their voices low, their movements practiced. Emily met them at the side gate, heart pounding so hard she could taste it. Tasha climbed out last, hair pulled back, face drawn with exhaustion. She took one look at Emily and didn't ask questions. "We're doing this fast," she said. Emily nodded, then glanced toward the front of the house. Martha was already crossing the street, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Emily hurried inside to get Frank. She expected resistance, anger, confusion. Instead, she found him standing in the hallway with Daisy's old leash in his hand, like he'd been waiting for instructions. "I'm coming," he said simply. He shouldn't be alone. They stepped into the backyard together, and Nico lifted his head the second he heard Frank's voice. The calf pressed forward against the pen, trunk reaching through the bars, searching. Frank walked up slow, palms open, the way he had that first morning. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "Easy." Emily's breath caught when she saw it. Frank's eyes suddenly sharp. Not fully young, not fully clear, but focused in a way she hadn't seen in months. He stared at Nico's trunk, the broad ears, the round feet. His lips parted, and his face shifted as if a curtain had moved. "That's not—" Frank began, then stopped. He blinked hard, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet with awe. "That's an elephant," he said. The words landed heavy and clean. Emily's chest seized. She had prayed for moments of clarity and feared them at the same time. Frank didn't step back. He didn't panic. He reached out anyway and let Nico's trunk curl around his forearm, gentle and warm, like a living scarf. Frank laughed once, breathy and stunned. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, tears already shining. "And you still picked me." Behind them, the side gate creaked. Martha's voice cut in, high and triumphant. "There! I told you!" She froze mid-sentence when she saw the handlers and the transport gear. Jake appeared near the sidewalk, close enough to be seen, not close enough to interfere. The animal control officer stood with her, eyes widening at the reality. Tasha spoke first, firm and calm. "We're relocating the calf to a licensed facility," she said, holding out paperwork. "Medical foster, emergency storm protocol." The officer took the forms and read, expression changing from suspicion to reluctant respect. Martha's mouth tightened, her victory slipping away. But none of that mattered to Frank. He was focused on Nico like the rest of the world had turned to static. He pressed his forehead lightly to the calf's cheek, a tender gesture that made Emily's throat burn. "Thank you," Frank said, voice shaking, "for finding me when I was lost." Nico made a soft trumpet, small but sharp with feeling, and pulled back when the handlers opened the transport ramp. He planted his feet, refusing. The calf's trunk reached for Frank again, searching, pleading. The handlers tried coaxing, then gentle guiding. Nico resisted harder, panic rising in his breathing. Frank lifted a hand. "I got him," he said, steady. He walked beside Nico, one slow step at a time, speaking in the same soothing tone he'd used for dogs his whole life. "Come on, buddy," he murmured. "You're brave. You're going to your real home now." Nico followed, not because of the rope, not because of the handlers, because Frank moved, and the calf's trust moved with him. At the ramp, Nico hesitated one last time, trunk curling around Frank's wrist in a final tight hold. Frank squeezed gently, then let go. The doors closed. The sound was dull, final. Nico's trunk slipped through the gap for a second, reaching toward Frank until the latch caught. Frank stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, like he was back on a job site, watching the van pull away as if he could will it to stop. When it disappeared down the street, the backyard felt too big and too quiet. Frank's hand drifted to his pocket and came out with the harmonica. He didn't lift it to play. He just held it, thumb rubbing the scratched metal like it was a memory he could keep warm. That night, Emily sat with him on the back step, the air soft again, the yard empty, where Buddy had stood. Frank stared at the grass for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, he said, "He went home." He paused, searching for the rest, and found it. "And so did I," Frank added, looking at Emily, as if seeing her clearly for the first time all day. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, tears slipping free. The fog would return. Tomorrow might be harder. But for one perfect, aching moment, the miracle stayed. "Before you go, tell me this with a simple comment. Comment 0 if you think Emily did the right thing by keeping the secret. Comment 1 if you think she should have told Frank the truth from day one. And if this story hit your heart even a little, tap subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story is even more unbelievable, and you won't want to miss it.